Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you all can see, I have with me Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain. General Hasnain has actually written some very incisive articles about the Ukraine crisis, which is happening and bringing Europe to the brink of war, if I may put it that way. Well, if it's going to happen or not, only time will tell. But if you listen to what the Americans are saying, it's imminent. I've brought in Sir here to help us understand how does India fit into this entire picture, having relations with the United States, having said the fact that Putin is also developing some relations with China, which are older, but they are getting in a little deeper into their relationships. So it's a delicate balance. Thank you, sir, for joining me today. And we hope for some insight as to what is happening and how does India play its cards.
Thank you very much, and Jai Hind to all our viewers.
So I'd like to begin with a simple, brief opening sort of a comment on what's happening with the Ukraine crisis. Things are escalating. There are talks happening, shuttle diplomacy, as a lot of people are putting it across. Apart from that, what are the kind of efforts that you analyze being put in from both the sides of the game to mitigate the risk which is actually on right now, sir?
See, firstly, Adi, this issue has been triggered primarily by the emerging international situation, which is essentially the post-pandemic evolution of the world order. You are aware that we've had a problem in Afghanistan, and now the Americans have withdrawn from Afghanistan. The Americans have also been able to stabilize the Middle East or West Asia to quite some extent, and we're looking forward to moving towards the Indo-Pacific with much of their focus and attention. And suddenly you find that on the doorstep of Europe, there is a rekindling of an old conflict. Old means that, yes, the conflict did start post-Cold War, but it really came into effect in 2014. This is why it leads one to deduce that it was perhaps triggered for a particular purpose. You can put the blame on both sides. The Russians, for example, do not want any further eastward march of NATO, led by the United States. It will give the United States and Western Europe a decided strategic advantage in the world balance of power. They've established certain red lines that, okay, you could come up to certain East European former Warsaw Pact countries. You could take under your cover certain former republics of the Soviet Union. But Ukraine is a no-go. It's too important. It's a large country, 48 million population. It's a powerhouse. It's of industry. It is also a granary. It's one of the granaries of Europe, in fact, in many ways. The manufacturing hub. And also geostrategically jutting into the innards of Russia. It gives whoever takes control of Ukraine obviously gives a massive advantage as far as Russia is concerned. From the US point of view, the NATO point of view, it was as if this effort towards to push the Russians and take advantage of what happened post-Cold War and rekindle 2014, because after 2014, the Russians had somehow taken advantage by occupying Crimea. They had occupied Sevastopol, where their Black Sea fleet was located. And they had made it very clear that there would be no further eastward march after the red lines had been drawn. But the Americans and the Europeans seem to be hell-bent to be able to push and continue with the post-Cold War politics. Now, obviously, things came to a head here. And the interesting part of it is that this whole thing then shifted eastwards and went as far as China and the Indo-Pacific, which is where the linkages of the international order start becoming very, very evident. But very interestingly, you asked, what are they doing to mitigate this? I think both sides are not keen to actually fight. This is a classic showcasing of brinkmanship, taking it to the limits, pushing your adversary to the limits, extreme elements of psychological power being played out, and messaging being carried out from time to time. But it appears quite clear that For example, from the American side, on the NATO side, there have been clear statements that we are not going to fight in Ukraine. So if you're not going to fight in Ukraine, how the hell does this whole business trouble you in that manner? In the sense that you're not going to go to war at all. The Americans would leave it to Europe, and much of Europe would leave it to East Europe to perhaps fight. Within NATO, there are countries who say very clearly, the new entrants who were former partners of Russia say that they don't want to have anything to do with this. So obviously, the intent is rather bleak. It's not very much there. The Russians, on the other side, are also 120,000 troops on the borders, maybe 1,200 tanks, etc. But that does not necessarily make for a war, for the simple reason that the Russians have already been at war. For the last 8 years, they've been at war in Ukraine through the hybrid route and have achieved what they wanted to achieve, actually. Yeah.
That's interesting that you put it across. So everybody talks about the fact that this is a new development. It's actually not. I mean, they've been fingering around in the Donbas region for years now. And if you listen to what their defense representative said yesterday, he put across these two regions in the eastern part of Ukraine as the center of the focus. So, I kind of tend to sometimes there's a misrepresentation about the entire geography of the region as well, sir.
This area which you talk about, the eastern part of Ukraine, is absolutely, as you said very correctly, is the center of gravity. That's the place where there is a 52% Russian ethnic domination, right? And influence already is very high. Crimea has already been taken over, invaded, not officially, of course. No one in the world has recognized it, but yes, it's under Russian control. And the Black Sea Fleet is very much there at Sevastopol. What people don't realize is that without Crimea, Russian maritime power is hugely compromised. You see, no entry into the Black Sea, and if you are not into the Black Sea, you're not into the Mediterranean, which means that you are only in control of, somewhere near the Pacific or the North Sea, somewhere beyond the North Sea, somewhere there. You are nowhere in the warm waters of the Mediterranean. That is the very important aspect which has to be remembered.
That was the key, actually, to the Crimean takeover. So let's talk about Russia and China. Putin visited China, met his so-called best friend Xi Jinping from the other side, and they have seemed to have put out a very, very thought-provoking statement. This whole meeting has been analyzed as Putin giving support to his Chinese friend and the Chinese doing the reciprocal towards Ukraine. What gets a little murky here is because business interests. Putin would expect Chinese money to kind of fight his war. China has interest in Ukraine as well. A lot of raw material. For example, 80% of Chinese corn comes from Ukraine. How do you analyze this very intricate and murky situation, if I may put it across?
Yes, again, very, very well put. And this question is very well put. What most people do not realize is the very important aspect of Ukraine, the economic aspect, that it was and is still the granary of Europe. Many of the food supplies to Russia itself and to China actually come out of Ukraine, right? And India, as far as India is concerned, in the past, the T-72 tank fleet actually all came out of Ukraine. And then Ukraine was also, if I may recall, one of the very important areas from the nuclear angle. Yes. At the end of the Cold War, the number of missiles and otherwise nuclear facilities which were left behind in the rump state of Ukraine was nobody's business. And then there was under an agreement that the whole thing was dismantled and taken apart. So Ukraine's importance cannot in any way be diluted. But the Chinese, yes, economically, they will be hit by what has happened. And their intent of the Belt and Road Initiative reaching right into the innards of Europe is not just the areas of Pakistan, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or any parts of Southeast Asia that the BRI is linked to. Is actually linking Beijing, linking China, the eastern coast, all the way to Europe, and through a railway infrastructure. If you remember, some years ago, experimentation on the railway infrastructure was going on. So Ukraine under war conditions, is not something which the Chinese would be very happy about. And that leads you to the fact that probably the Chinese know very well that there is going to be no war, and that what the Russians are doing is only brinkmanship, and it's a good old hybrid conflict which has been fought for the last 8 years and fought to great advantage by the Russians. So this seems to be some kind of a preconceived idea and knowledge which the Chinese appear to be having. For them, strategically, it is much more important. Engagement in Ukraine, a limited war in Europe, on the doorstep of Europe, should I say, uh, drawing in the United States and drawing in some of the NATO countries. Although the Chinese have good linkages with Germany, for example, with France too. They've got good economic relations with all these countries, and they would not want to engage in a manner in which that there would be economic dilution of their economic relationships. But having said that, they know very well that the Russians can keep the Americans, keep NATO engaged in Europe, like the good old war during the Cold War, to keep away in the United States from the key areas of international politics today. That is the Indo-Pacific, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Indian Ocean. This whole region. The Chinese are not yet prepared to contest the United States. I think we are quite clear about it. China may have the largest set of armed forces, but when it comes to technologies, etc., they're still nowhere near the United States. Maritime power, particularly in comparison, the Chinese are nowhere near the United States. So they would want to pend this for longer, to maybe another 10 years or so, in which they'll be fully prepared. And therefore, for them strategically, the United States remaining committed to the Middle East, Afghanistan, East Europe, anywhere, only adds greater dividend to them and gives them that time which they need on their hands to prepare for the future.
That's an interesting perspective, and I must say it does make the most amount of sense. Why? Because, as you say, Chinese are not ready to handle the United States, so it's always better to have a diversion somewhere else so that they can actually get to their designs. Having said that, sir, let me actually just poke you a little bit and ask you: do you think the Chinese would actually take a step in the garb of any small step somewhere here and there, probably a
Well, in the
adventure?
beginning of this crisis, even someone like me was tending to overread the situation and say that it could be Russia into Ukraine and China into Taiwan. Now, today, I think now 3 weeks down, I tend to think that perhaps I was overreading the situation. Uh, the Chinese will not get themselves tied up in knots. They don't want to get into, because they are very clear. Their ambitions are 2035, 2049. That's the timeline that they are looking at. Why prematurely jump into a situation where there are no guarantees of victory, right? Taiwan could just be the trigger of a major engagement against the United States, for which the Chinese are not fully prepared. Although, well, you can't say the United States is completely prepared for it either. But then Japan has given a huge commitment. The South Koreans have given a huge commitment. But this kind of a situation can lead to some very, very negative outcomes for China. Something which they have built up all these years from 1978, from Deng Xiaoping's dream. They have built this up. Why bring it to naught at this particular time? And that too, just for the sake of perhaps supporting the Russians? No, that's a no completely. But yes, to support the Russians, to delay everything, to allow them the leeway, the flexibility to rise, continue to rise and develop themselves economically. Remember, the Chinese growth is coming down to 5%. And this is something which is worrying them tremendously. This will also have to be kept in mind. Imagine tomorrow you are at war, and for a long drawn out war with a country which is, well, economically a $21 trillion economy. It's not easy for you to sort of come back from that war in a quicker time frame. The Chinese are going to be very circumspect, very, very careful about the decisions that they therefore take.
Absolutely, sir, I agree with you, sir. Russia would also understand, any agreement of this sort from China, any military sort of an agreement, if I may take a step forward and draw out, would also be at the back of their relations with India. And with the current India-China standoff, it's going to be a tightrope for them as well. And how do you think the Russians will actually look at this entire thing?
Actually, a lot of people look at the relationship between India and Russia only from an India-Russia angle, not from a Russia-India angle.
True.
I do tend to feel that as much advantage that India has of having the Russians on our side, which we had in 1971 in particular, and thereafter too, the Russians have an equally important strategic reasons for having India on their side. Remember, in this whole region, the region of the great game, which we have discussed many times together. India is one of those countries which is a balancing force, a big economy, a large populated nation, a large set of armed forces in a nation, in an area like Afghanistan, Pakistan, portions of Central Asia, where there is always evidence of ideological issues arising, the whole issue of narcotics, radicalism, all kinds of things which are part of the overall new grade game. So the Russian-Indian relationship is equally important, and Mr. Putin has only recently visited India. From time to time, you'll find Russian signals will be sent to India. Uh, Signals of, when nations tend to find that a relationship, there is some dilution taking place in a relationship, and a signal is sent out. The Russians are good in sending out these kind of signals to India. They have done it in the past. To 2015, I remember visiting Moscow, and there in the various educational institutions, in the foreign ministry, everywhere, we were being given subtle hints that it seems that India is not considering the Russia as any longer as a major strategic partner. We were getting the message very, very clear from that. So I think that it's an important aspect. The Russia-India relationship is very important, and therefore the Russians are not going to. Well, they've gone. Mr. Putin has gone to Beijing, and he has held out his hand to Xi Jinping. A stronger relationship, something similar to Pakistan. Higher than the skies and deeper than the oceans and sweeter than honey, and that kind of a relationship they've been talking about. This is all to send a lot of messages, right? Nations don't start building up stronger relations with other countries and at the cost of diluting the existing relationship. So I don't think India should feel perturbed in any way that as if the Russians are suddenly losing their confidence on India, and that they're looking at India getting far too close to the United States. There's no doubt this is a two-way juggle which will carry on, and each side will tussle for the other. As much as India has to balance out a relationship between Russia and the United States, Russia has to balance out a relationship between China and India, right? And similarly, perhaps the Chinese have to balance out their relationship with all three other countries also. So it's all a question of balancing out from time to time. And therefore, when statements are made once in a while, here and there, I don't think you should overread them. This current the situation with the kind of statements made in Beijing during the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics are, well, these are statements for the moment, I would say, statements for the times at this time. They don't necessarily mean anything very great.
It's probably directed towards the Western media more than
absolutely
the regional.
directed at the West. To send them that, say that we are together, and you've consolidated together.
Exactly. So, let's bring the topic to a little light-hearted sort of a conversation. And when I mentioned Pakistan, the minute Imran Khan came back from Beijing, one of the things that he said, "I'm going to Russia," and that kind of caught a lot of Indians' eyes. Ki yaar, ye kya hua? Now, when you hear what the Pakistanis themselves are saying, they're kind of rubbishing it as another, whitewash in Imran Khan's own private sort of a image building game. What do you think is happening here?
The last time a Pakistani Prime Minister visited Moscow was 1999. 23 years ago, Nawaz Sharif went there. Now, to say that Pakistan is unimportant for Russia also would be incorrect.
True.
You see, we have to give the devil its due. Pakistan is geostrategically one of the most important countries in this region, right? The kind of outlets it gives into the seas, into the oceans, the access from Central Asia, the heart of Asia, into the Indian Ocean, the access from the Indian Ocean to the to the heart of Asia itself. With Iran being a pariah at the moment, the access to Central Asia is only through Pakistan, right? And the Americans couldn't have fought a war in Afghanistan without the support of Pakistan. The entire logistics was through Karachi and things like that. They could have fought a war perhaps by keeping Tajikistan, Turkmenistan as the airheads, but that would have cost them 3 times what the cost of the war was. So Pakistan is very important, and we just, of course, we would always like to keep them aside and say that Pakistan is of no great strategic importance. But the international community does look upon Pakistan in that manner, and that's one of the reasons why you find that despite all our efforts to um, paint them in different ways and get them to be called a rogue nation, etc., we have not been able to do it so far. We have not been successful in doing it. Privately, everyone tells us this is what Pakistan is, but officially, no one really likes to do it. Even the United Nations, you never have had a kind of a stricture passed against Pakistan in this particular manner. So the Russians similarly are looking at Pakistan from a geostrategic angle. And the emerging situation of the new great game in this area, you see, Afghanistan in the throes of problems, Afghanistan with this kind of instability is a place which the Russians are always worried about. They worry that if everything breaks down here, and in a nation of 40 million odd people, if everything breaks down here, this is the ground from where this kind of a radical ideological influence which can come into Central Asia. Central Asia has 72 million Muslims. Remember, 72 million. And Russia has an 11% Muslim population in Dagestan, Chechnya, and places like that. They've had their internal problems with this population, and they suspect that they will have major problems in Central Asia if they are not in control of things. Therefore, they would always like to play along with Pakistan because they think that Pakistan is the country which has the greatest influence in Afghanistan. They are also cooperating with the Chinese, and the Chinese are cooperating with them because they know that this belt extends into Xinjiang, large Uyghur population there, and obviously ideological issues can enter there also. So that is one of the prime reasons why Russia is looking for a strategic relationship, not a partnership as such, but good relations with Pakistan, consultation from time to time, guidance on the handling of Afghanistan and access into Central Asia and things like that. So Mr. Imran Khan's visit is definitely primarily based on these issues. And of course, Imran Khan will go anywhere where there's a possibility of extending your hand and getting some hold of some money, which he did in Beijing recently, getting from Saudi Arabia, also the UAE and things like that. Their economy is in shambles, absolutely. And if they don't do something about it, it's going to cause a major problem for Pakistan. So I think this visit should be looked at from that particular angle. And I don't think Russia looks at Pakistan in any way other than this. In no way supports it against India. It has made it very clear that Jammu and Kashmir is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. I think there was a one-off statement by one of the agencies within Russia, which sort of called the Jammu and Kashmir conflict as something akin to Palestine and things like that. And the Russians have already virtually apologized for that. They've perhaps that was a subtle messaging also in a way to tell India that, see, we can also look at things differently in the Indian subcontinent. But I don't take that aspect too seriously.
That's very interesting. As a matter of fact, that was a big controversy for a day or two online as well. Everybody kind of, started looking at what happened here. So, my last question would be about India. Indian Foreign Minister right now, S. Jaishankar, just finished his Quad meeting. The rumor has it that the US predominate, just actually dominated the entire conversation with the Ukraine crisis. And I'm sure there would have been some effort in putting out a joint statement as a quad country, group against Russia. India, of course, abstained from a vote in the United Nations, has said very clearly it's a bilateral issue. We would like it to be resolved peacefully through dialogue. That's a very standard sort of a clean reply. How do you think India fits into this entire thing? Looking at the fact of Quad one side, USA, Russia, and it's just a big pickle jar, if I may.
It could develop into a very awkward kind of a situation for India because you see, nations with whom we are close are all involved in it. I mean, the Russians, we got a close relationship with Russia. We are an emerging strategic partner of the United States. We've got our interests in the Indo-Pacific. We're a member of the Quad. And therefore, obviously, we get sandwiched in the middle of all this. But I thought this morning's newspapers, when I saw the Honorable External Affairs Minister taking a very, very balanced stand, where he clearly made a statement that India would not be discussing Ukraine. India would not look at Ukraine as the important aspect of this particular meeting. They would be looking only at the Indo-Pacific. And I think India insisted on that, although there must have been many deliberations on Ukraine too, and the outcomes, because there are linkages which are all over, which we have already discussed. But at the end of the day, I'm told that even the statement coming out, the joint statement coming out from this meeting had no mention of Ukraine, at least till the time when I read the media. There was
No.
nothing on Ukraine which had emerged. So I think that angle India has handled it very well. At the same time, I think we are in consultation with both countries. We are in consultation with some of the European countries like France, Germany, UK, I'm sure. Mr. Macron is Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is particularly quite close to India, and I'm sure there must have been some kind of deliberations, some or back channel kind of talks which would have gone on. So, as far as India is concerned, it is a question of ensuring that East Europe, or rather the European theater, remains stable, West Asia remains stable, the third pole of these areas of concern, that is Afghanistan and Central Asia, remains stable, to allow us all to concentrate on the Indo-Pacific. So the convergence of interests with the United States are very, very high. With the Quad countries is very, very high. We are aware that time is running out. We are at 2022, and the Chinese have projected all kinds of things 10 years from now, 10 to 12, 13 years from now. We have to be prepared for that. I think we have done well to continue our deliberations with the Quad countries and our consultations and discussions with them, even in the middle of this crisis. If this kind of a discussion is going on, it shows that things seem to be in the right place. So as far as India is concerned, our interests are very clear. We have to be equidistant from Russia. We cannot afford to have a diluted stance towards Russia. Cannot allow our relationship with Russia to get compromised in any way. And we cannot allow any manifestation of all this on our borders, particularly on our northern borders.
Correct.
You can't have, for example, as an outcome of the churning which is going on, you suddenly find the developments on the northern borders to create some issues for us, to keep us out of the Indo-Pacific, to keep us out of the Quad, to reduce our overall capability to be international players. These kind of things could very well happen by a mere trigger on the line of actual control for the next 2 years or so, as we've seen what's happened in the previous 2 years. So these are things that we have to be careful of, and a strong relationship with Russia will ensure also that the Chinese will think twice. The Chinese will think twice, and it should be made amply clear in our projections to the Chinese, also in all our deliberations, that we have friends. India is geostrategically a very, very important nation, and there will be many countries in the world who will support India if push comes to shove.
delicate balance, I must say. And till now, I think the game is going on pretty well. It's coming under our favor, and as you're very right. I think I checked it about an hour ago as well. There is in the joint statement mentioned only Myanmar and North Korea.
Absolutely.
So I think we've played this game very well in keeping Ukraine out of the Quad. Sir, thank you so much. I think you've given us very interesting insights as to the crisis in Europe and amongst all the warmongering which is happening and the run and mill of signals, for example, the United States pulling out its citizens and so on and so forth. I believe there was a update about 15 minutes ago when we just started the conversation. The Russians have also said we are going to optimize our diplomatic staff within the Ukrainian embassy. So
These are all signals. You see, these are the ways you find of sending home messages, how to turn the screw, how to unscrew a little bit. So this carries on all the time in international affairs.
as a matter of fact, that's what I wanted to, just relate these two that you put out the signal thing very, very nicely, and it's a subtle way of putting
You
across
see,
messages.
Adi, I can tell you many years ago,
So,
when my unit was deployed in Punjab in 1990, we came out of Sri Lanka and we went straight into Punjab. I still remember the message given out by our corps commander. He said, "Your brigade, which has come from Eastern India, we were part of a brigade which was stationed in Barrackpur and Calcutta. It is like a screw. It is only turning the screw one turn or half a turn. It is sending home a message that we are prepared, we are preparing, we will go to war if necessary." This is the time, if you remember, of exercise Zarb-e Momin of
yes.
Pakistan had just taken place, a huge exercise, and we had redeployed a lot of our forces. And my unit, I used to feel very proud that my unit is one of the units which is being used to turn the screw.
So messaging is key, and I think these subtle messages require a lot of help in understanding and deciphering for the populace who kind of gets dragged away with all the rhetoric which is flying around online as well as in
Absolutely.
our mainstream media.
Everyone tends to take things literally, but in international affairs, a lot is said, but a lot is not meant also.
Absolutely, sir. I think I agree with you, and it's a difficult preposition for anybody to just read an article because it's motivated to a large extent by a lot of people. I'm not saying politically motivated, but motivated in your own interests, for that matter.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting that you've brought out this perspective. Sir, thank you so much once again. It's always a pleasure talking to you and learning from you, if I may say so. Till next time, sir, for another subject, on another day. Jai Hind, sir.
Jai Hind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.